So that was Lynn Miles, a Canadian singer and songwriter. And some of the lines, if you were able to hear them, sometimes it's not so clear, really poignant. And I've got no strength to move, to breathe, to cry, to scream, to stand, to fight. 1,000 lovers could put their arms around me. 1,000 oceans could fall like summer rain. 1,000 mothers could sing, "Hush now, don't you cry." There's nothing in the world tonight that's going to take away my pain. It's one of my favorite songs to listen to when I'm blue. And I think we all know what that space feels like. When the conditions pile up that are difficult, unfavorable, it just feels like there's no way out, or no way through it. So the other evening, one of our members, if we even have membership here, asked me a question. And she said, well, when things get really bad, why in the world would you want to be mindful? You know, when these things pile up, one thing and another, why would you want to be even aware of it? I thought it was a great question. I mean, why not just try to avoid difficult emotions? Or try to avoid noticing any of the thoughts that are difficult, that come along with these difficult emotions? Who really wants to stick their nose in difficulties like that, if they can be avoided? Now, the answer to that question, when things get really bad, why in the world would you want to be mindful? The answer to that can actually be the difference between freedom and bondage, or heaven and hell. For those of you that have been practicing for a while, or coming here, or going on retreats, or you have other spiritual practices, you've probably heard some form of the wording turn toward your experience. Turn toward your experience with mindfulness, kindness, equanimity, or some such words. Well, let's look a little bit tonight at a pronouncement like that, or guidance like that. Because in difficult times, it would seem to fly in the face, of our instincts. And our instincts are to avoid anything unpleasant. I mean, it's true, isn't it, that it's natural to recoil from anything that touches our senses that's unpleasant. Smells that we deem to be noxious smells, tastes that we deem to be awful, sights and sounds that are disturbing to us, uncomfortable physical sensations and thoughts. Isn't it true that our first reaction is to just kind of, or turn away? It's natural, and it's actually survival-oriented, if you think about it. Because our limbic system, our reptile brain, it doesn't finally discriminate to what's going to kill us and what doesn't. If it's unpleasant, it backs away. Or there's that tendency to pull away. So why don't we just kind of move along with this reptilian brain that we have at the base of our brainstem and just avoid, if we can, all unpleasantness and just seek pleasure all the time? What's wrong with that? Now, and I must say that in the context of spiritual practice, there are times when diverting ourselves is the most skillful thing that we can do. If your nervous system is overwhelmed by whatever the conditions are, mindfulness isn't possible. It's not a question of being mindful. You're just in some kind of trauma vortex or some really powerful reaction, and you couldn't find mindfulness if your life depended on it. At those times, taking refuge in whatever is skillful is the best things you can do. Maybe it's getting some exercise. Maybe it's taking a walk in nature, visiting a friend, reading a movie, having a hot bath or some tea, whatever it is. So distraction is skillful at certain times. It's not that turning toward our experience with kindness, equanimity, and connection can work in all situations, because sometimes our nervous system's overwhelmed and we just need some kind of refuge. But if that becomes a lifetime habit of distracting anytime anything is a little bit unpleasant, anytime something challenging comes up, there's going to be a cost to that. This is kind of an extreme example, but I was just reading an article yesterday. And it points to this growing cultural issue with mostly young men, or young men in particular. It's a couple of dual habits or addictions that have been developed in their response to some normal anxiety, some normal stress in a young person's life. And it was an article on the CNN website, and the name of the article was "The Demise of Guys: How Video Games and Porn Are Ruining a Generation." So the authors were arguing that video games and porn are creating what they call these arousal addictions, which are different than the normal addictions, alcohol and drugs, that we're used to, where a person wants more and more of whatever that substance is. This is the arousal addictions, more about wanting something different. They also want more and more, but they want it to be different. So in that article, they're saying that many young men, or an increasing number of young men, are being, in a way, digitally rewired in a way that they demand constant stimulation. And so you can imagine all the effects that this can have. There's a desensitization to reality. Their motivation, their capacity to study, get things done, kind of work through challenges, engage in healthy relationships, all those areas, those important areas of life, are compromised. So somewhere a turn gets taken, to use these video games and porn to relieve some of the normal anxieties that come up. And when that turn is taken and that becomes habituated, there's a tremendous amount of pain for that person ultimately and everyone around them. So, this is the research like that piece of research and other similar research. It's obvious that addictions can do harm. But what's also true is that on a more subtle level, avoiding what is can dampen a life. And it's kind of like dragging an anchor around a little bit. It can be very subtle. So I want to talk about that a little bit, and how this practice can work with that kind of habituation of avoiding. One way of looking at a worthwhile spiritual practice, we're really developing in a couple of areas. First, you're developing a perspective that is a perspective that's always growing in understanding. And we can call that wisdom. And second, you're developing a series of skillful means, ways of skillfully working with whatever comes up in your life any situation. These skillful means help you navigate that. So let's look at this perspective, developing a perspective. The Buddha called it wise perspective or wise view. It's one of the factors of the Eightfold Path. So the Eightfold Path is the core of this spiritual practice for sure, and it's actually the elements of it show up in other spiritual practices too. So if the Eightfold Path, we can look at it as three groups of training. There's training in wisdom, which is this wise view or wise perspective, a perspective that has wisdom in it. And then there's wise intention. Out of that perspective comes our intentions for living this life. And then so that's one training. Call that training in wisdom. Training in ethical conduct. So out of those intentions come wise speech, wise action, and wise livelihood. Be choosing speech, actions, and ways of earning our living that don't cause harm. And then the third training is in mental development. That's like you come here and you learn to meditate. And under that training is learning about what you might call wise effort or appropriate effort. Wise mindfulness and wise concentration or samadhi, kind of developing the mind so it can see clearly, so it can understand. And so then that in itself will inform our behaviors. But it's interesting, whenever these 8 path factors are talked about, wise view or wise understanding is always mentioned first. Because in a way, without it, we don't start. If you have no view or perspective, you're just not going to do anything. You're not going to take the time and the effort to develop any kind of spiritual practice. So it lays out the roadmap for us, our growing understanding. That's the roadmap for what we think, say, and do in terms of our daily living. It's like a spiritual GPS, this wise view. So you need a little, to begin a spiritual practice, you need a little wisdom to begin with, or you just don't take it up. This is from the Buddha. He says, Bhikkhus, just as the dawn is the forerunner and first indication of the rising of the sun, so is right view the forerunner and first indication of wholesome states. For one of right view, bhikkhus, right intention springs up. For one of right intention, right speech springs up. For one of right speech, right action springs up. For one of right action, right livelihood springs up. For one of right livelihood, right effort springs up. For one of right effort, right mindfulness springs up. For one of right mindfulness, right concentration springs up. For one of right concentration, right knowledge springs up. For one of right knowledge, right deliverance springs up. Deliverance meaning awakening. All right, so what is this wise view? How is a view wise? What are the components of a wise view? People have lots of perspectives on things. All kinds of political perspectives, all kinds of, perspectives on how to live a life. Now, if we take the Buddha's teaching, it's encapsulated in what he calls the 3 characteristics of existence. Those are characteristics that each of us share in this life. And the Buddha taught and tried to convince his students that if you would practice and internalize even one of these characteristics, get to really know it on a deep, visceral level, that you'd be free. That your suffering would decrease dramatically or disappear. You'd be awakened. So each of these 3 characteristics are considered a portal to freedom. And of course they're all related. like everything else in the Dharma and in what we're practicing. So the first characteristic, and everybody gets this intellectually, is impermanence. That everything in creation is on the move. If you look out, we're sitting on this earth. It's spinning at 11,000 miles an hour. It's moving around our sun at 70,000 miles an hour. Our whole solar system, the brother and sister planets around this sun, are moving together at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And we are in this thing that we call the Milky Way galaxy, of which there are billions of other suns and planets, and they're all moving at about that rate of speed. And the whole galaxy itself, the Milky Way galaxy, is moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And there are 1,000,000 galaxies like ours, and no end to them. And everything is moving. We've never been in the same place twice. And if you look inside, subatomically, it's absolutely amazing. Just looking at the atoms, and now we know even beyond the atoms. The electron going around the nucleus of the atom, the proton, and the neutron. And now we look at the subatomic particles, and we discover that they're waves and particles that are coming and going, coming into being and going by the millions in each nanosecond. And so there's really just vibrating space. If we had an electron microscope and we were looking at it, everything's moving. Impermanence. It was one of the foundational teachings of the Buddha, and he didn't have any instrumentation other than his senses. And over the course of the Buddha's teaching, he taught like 50 or so different meditations. And in each one, in almost every one, the main part of the instructions, or one of the parts of the instructions, is always look at the change. Watch what's changing. Notice the change. Watch the changing patterns in the breath, in body sensations, in emotions. He felt it was imperative for his students to really pay attention to change in the interior landscape and externally. He wanted us to get the fact that change is the major factor, the foundation of all of nature. It's the way of nature. He also knew from his own experience and from teaching many students that if you really saw and internalized this change, got it on a visceral level, it would really help you into insights on how and why you're suffering. You suffer because you're grasping, trying to hold things that you like as they are. And that doesn't work in nature because everything's changing. Or you're trying to push things away, because you don't like the way they are. So that kind of grasping, and it's not that we don't try to change things that are uncomfortable or wrong in the world, because we do. But it's part of that understanding that the suffering, unsatisfactoriness, is called by grasping on, trying to fight nature. So when you see nature moving like this, and you start to get that, well, then you're less likely to try to stop it, hold it, resist it, push it. Things are coming and going all the time. People. Everything arising and passing away. So that's the second characteristic of existence, that there is suffering and that there is a cause of it. And so this understanding of suffering is important, and we talk about it a lot here. And that there is an end to it. Buddhism isn't about, it's suffering, it's suffering. It talks about, with the proper cultivation and training, there's an end to it. In this lifetime. It's not a reward of another lifetime. Although Buddhism has this whole cosmology that we could talk about too, which is kind of fun. But we're not going to do that now. And so the third characteristic that the Buddha mentioned is the selfless nature of creation. Selfless nature. Wait a minute, I have a self. You know. So we're watching ourselves internally. We're watching everything outside. It's all moving and changing. And so there's this challenging question. Well, is there a solid, separate, solidified self that's embattled and fighting with every other solid, separate, embattled self? Well, what is solid if all my emotions are changing all the time, my body is changing all the time, everything about this activity known as Pat is changing and moving, well, where's the permanent self? That's a question we touch on here a lot. Just don't get tangled up in it. But it's an exploration. And so without some rudiment of understanding impermanence or understanding why you suffer or some sensibility to the selfless nature of existence, then you get prone to repeated identifications, lost, no space, no perspective, kind of freaking out over and over, stuck again, stuck again. And that's exhausting. So we have this mindfulness practice. And we're cultivating this perspective by examining, contemplating different aspects of our life. And we're also cultivating skillful ways that when something really rough comes up, that we can give our attention to it. These strong, painful body sensations or painful emotions, that there are ways, skillful ways to give our attention to it that can bring us some relief. So I thought we'd do a short reflection that would kind of demonstrate that. So just sitting comfortably as you are. And this is just a short reflection to illustrate, the process for working skillfully with something, with a challenging emotion. We'll use that. So take a few deep breaths. Take at least 3 full breaths. In and out, emptying the lungs, allowing your attention to kind of settle into the body. Now I invite you to bring to mind a situation that's emotionally challenging, but not the most challenging. Don't want you to re-traumatize yourself. Something that's mildly challenging. Take some moments to pick one out. Really immerse yourself into that situation. What's the setting like? What do you see around you? If there are other people there, who is there? If there words were spoken, what words were spoken? Immerse yourself, get a feel for the difficulty, the challenge in this situation. Now the first step towards freedom and healing is to just recognize what emotions are happening. Just being able to identify them, recognize them. Is there one emotion that you're feeling as you're back in this situation? Or are there more than one? Sometimes there's kind of a lead emotion, and then with a little quiet contemplation, we can discover others. Often underneath anger, there may be hurt, sadness, grief. So explore, just recognizing. What constellation of emotions are you recognizing in this situation? And by just naming them, it changes your relationship to the challenging emotion. Because at that moment, you're no longer totally lost. You're feeling what's going on, but not completely identified. There's a healthy space that gets created by just naming the emotions involved. And so as you name these emotions, bring forth the attitude of acceptance. Allowing the emotion to be there. It's like the weather. Not resisting, suppressing, repressing. Just a kindly acceptance of what is. Oh, here's anger, or oh, here's fear, or grief again. Whatever it may be. Receiving the emotion with kindness. Allowing it to percolate through. Not trying to make it go away. So we've identified, we've kindly accepted what is, accepted the weather. Now, intimately exploring that phenomena, with gentleness, of course. Where do you feel that emotion in the body? Where does it manifest? Where's it located? Chest, belly, neck, face? How big is it? How intense is it? Is there movement in it? Or does it just kind of sparkle a little bit like electricity? And also, very importantly, what thoughts are associated with it? Is there a belief about it? Oh, I'm this, or I'm that, or I can't do this, or whatever it might be. A story. Maybe an old story that you've heard 1,000,000 times. So we're investigating with kindness. Knowing the flavors of the emotions. Feeling it directly in the body as it moves and changes. Checking any beliefs that may be playing, any tape loops that could be happening. And noticing whether you're pushing away or grasping this constellation of emotions. Or are you allowing? This is all done gently. So, okay. So this is a way of using the practice, the skillful mindfulness process, that lessens identification, lessens the time that we're lost, the time that we're stuck. So we're turning toward the experience with some precision and a lot of kindness. And there's an acronym that we talk about here that can be helpful to remember that underscores this process. RAIN, R-A-I-N. Recognizing what's happening. You know, in that recognition, that's an immediate change of the relationship to that emotion. We're no longer, sucked under the undertow, so to speak. We're allowing it. We're kind of developing this kindness, this friendliness, this acceptance to ourself, to our emotions, to phenomena as they're happening. That's the A. We're becoming intimate Investigating, that's the I. Again, with kindness. Knowing the different aspects of the emotion, feeling it in the body, looking at the story that oftentimes goes with it. And then the N, that's the non-identification, the non-being lost, the non-being stuck. That happens when we process our experience directly, wholeheartedly, and with kindness, that we're just not lost as much of the time. But it's easy, I know from my own experience, not too long ago, I was working with it was a series of difficult conditions in my life, and I was working with them in this manner. But there wasn't much happening. And I was noticing my energy was reducing. I wasn't getting things done the way I ordinarily would in life, different projects and things. So I took a closer look at the process, and I noticed that I had this avoidance. I wasn't accepting. I wasn't fully there. I didn't want to fully feel the feelings that were there. So I was just kind of skimming over them, and so the result was a kind of not very productive. And when I noticed that and kind of just redoubled my effort to more fully face and be with and allow, there was a kind of clearing of energy and a movement and a reconnection with some joy, even despite difficult external conditions. Because this awareness is vast and it has the capacity to hold everything. So at the same time that we may be going through difficult experiences, difficult conditions, there can be moments of great joy, humor, energy. So this spacious perspective that we get as the fruit of our practice really aligns us with nature. That everything is changing all the time. A lot of things are not in our control. Some things are, but not so much. And this direct touching into impermanence, this deeper understanding of how and why we suffer, this kind of direct experience, to the extent that we're able to understand it and experience, of the selfless flow of phenomena. That informs our perspective. It helps us create a bigger picture, a better understanding of nature. And with that kind of growing and developing in the background, anything that happens in our life kind of is informed by that perspective. And it gives it perspective. There's more spaciousness. And when particular phenomena arise, kind of very acute phenomena, difficult conditions, out of this backdrop of a flowing, moving nature, well, then we apply mindfulness. And it's a mindfulness imbued with equanimity and kindness to whatever that phenomena is. So this is a system for navigating life. And a little practice can reduce suffering. Immensely, actually. And a lot of practice can eliminate suffering. That's the promise of this path. So when your partner done left you, and your dog is dying, and your pickup truck done thrown a rod, it's workable. So enjoy the energy of the evening, these storms coming through, and we will see you next week.